After finding my elderly mom in tears one afternoon, all thanks to relentless harassment from our power-hungry neighbor Cheryl, I knew it was time to do something. With the kind of resources that come from being a multi-millionaire, I figured I'd dig into what was really going on behind the scenes and expose the corruption tearing apart the peace in our quiet little community. But the deeper I looked, the darker things got, way beyond petty rules and HOA fines. What I uncovered wasn't just about roses or garden gnomes. It was something far more twisted. Cheryl's grip on the neighborhood was strong, but she was about to face someone who wouldn't just roll over. She had no idea who she was messing with. Hey, welcome to my channel. If you enjoy stories about HOA drama and over-the-top Karens, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Now let me take you back to the day everything shifted. It started off like any regular Sunday morning. I was on a video call with my mom, just catching up. She was showing off her award-winning roses, the same garden she'd been pouring her heart into for the last 30 years. That garden was her pride and joy, a real symbol of the peaceful life we had in that suburban neighborhood. That's when I heard it, this sharp nasal voice coming through the phone. "Excuse me, but those roses are clearly in violation of Section 8.2 of the HOA bylaws." My mom's hands started to shake as she turned the camera. Standing right there on the sidewalk was Cheryl Monroe, our new neighbor. She was dressed in a stiff beige pantsuit, holding a measuring tape in one hand and her phone in the other, already snapping pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. I watched from hundreds of miles away as this complete stranger started scolding my 72-year-old mother over her rose bushes, claiming they were half an inch too close to the sidewalk. "I've just been elected HOA president," Cheryl said, wearing a smug little grin, "and I intend to restore proper standards around here." She actually waved her measuring tape like some kind of badge of authority. Then came the ultimatum. "You have 48 hours to move these roses back, or it's a $100 fine for every day they stay where they are." I tried to keep my cool. I told Mom not to worry, that I'd take care of any fines. I ran a successful tech company. Money wasn't the issue. At the time, I figured this was just one of those annoying neighborhood power trips, and throwing some cash at it would make it go away. Looking back now, I should have seen the red flags waving like parade banners. The roses were just the start. Within a week, Cheryl had found 3 more violations. First, she went after Mom's vintage mailbox, the one my dad had put in before he passed. Suddenly, it didn't meet, quote, community aesthetic standards. Then it was her wind chimes, which Mom used to track wind direction for her gardening, now labeled as noise disturbances. Even her collection of garden gnomes, gathered over decades, was suddenly classified as tacky lawn decor that had to go immediately. Every morning, Cheryl would patrol the neighborhood like a watchdog, ruler in one hand, camera in the other. But she always spent extra time at my mom's place, taking close-up photos, measuring things from every angle, clearly looking for anything she could flag. Word started spreading among the neighbors. People were whispering that Cheryl seemed obsessed with my mom's property, but no one dared to confront her. They remembered what happened to the Crawfords. When they tried to appeal one of Cheryl's violation notices, their paperwork mysteriously disappeared, and their fines doubled overnight. Meanwhile, I was caught up in a massive company merger, bouncing between cities, airports, and meetings. But every time my plane landed, I'd check my inbox and find yet another email from Cheryl, each with a brand new violation attached. Mom did her best to keep up, but with her arthritis, it was getting harder to handle all of Cheryl's demands. She even stopped going to her garden club meetings, too embarrassed about all the fines and complaints. The final straw came when Mom called me crying. Cheryl had posted photos of Mom's yard on the neighborhood Facebook page, labeling our home a community eyesore and blaming it for dragging down property values. Seeing my mother's garden, the thing she loved most, turned into some kind of public shaming project, that hit me hard. It lit a fire in me. What Cheryl didn't realize was that while she was busy playing dictator with a measuring tape, I had just finalized the sale of my company. She assumed I was just some busy son who'd keep throwing money at the problem to keep it quiet. She didn't know she was poking a bear, one with more than enough resources to do more than fight back. I wasn't just coming to pay fines. I was coming to change the rules of the game. That night, I booked a flight home. Not long after, I got another email from Cheryl, this time with a $23,000 landscaping quote for mandatory improvements. And of course, she included a list of approved contractors, all conveniently charging 3 times the normal rate. I couldn't help but smile as I typed my reply. Dear Mrs. Monroe, I'll be handling this in person. See you soon. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just bringing a checkbook. I was bringing a plan. And Cheryl's little power trip? It was about to hit a wall it couldn't climb. When I saw the letter sticking out of Mom's mailbox, my stomach dropped. Her hands were shaking as she opened it, and I could already tell it wasn't good news. It was the 5th violation notice she'd received this month. Cheryl Monroe, our neighbor from hell and self-declared queen of the HOA, was clearly stepping up her harassment campaign. This time she claimed Mom's American flag was mounted 2 inches too low. And of course, we had exactly 48 hours to fix it or get hit with a $500 fine. I helped Mom over to her favorite chair and brewed her a cup of tea while she told me what had happened the day before. Apparently, Cheryl had spent half an hour standing in our driveway, snapping photos of Mom's rose bushes and measuring each one with a ruler. When Mom finally asked what in the world she was doing, Cheryl didn't even hesitate. She just snapped. If you can't keep your property up to HOA standards, maybe it's time to think about moving into a retirement home. The very next day, every neighbor got a flyer in their mailbox. It was an urgent notice about a special emergency HOA meeting to discuss, quote, serious property violations that were threatening the community's values. Cheryl had strategically scheduled it for a time when I was supposed to be in Japan, closing one of the biggest business deals of my life. But what Cheryl didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting everything, recording every conversation, cataloging every violation notice, and keeping a detailed timeline of her harassment. Later that same afternoon, while I was helping Mom tidy up her garden, I spotted Cheryl throwing what looked like a little backyard tea party. Mrs. Whitaker and Mrs. Delaney, both on the HOA board, were there, along with a few other familiar faces from the neighborhood. I could hear Cheryl's grating voice through the fence. It's such a shame about that house on Elore Street, she said. My realtor friend told me places like that could tank our property values by 15%. That night, I decided to check Mom's security camera footage, and what I found made my blood boil. Cheryl had been sneaking onto our property after dark, moving Mom's potted plants just slightly over the property line, then taking photos the next morning to claim we were in violation. As angry as I was, I knew I had to stay calm. I needed more evidence. The following week, while Cheryl was off at work, I hired a professional landscaping crew to completely revamp Mom's garden, top to bottom. I'd memorized every rule in the HOA's ridiculous handbook, down to the inch. Everything was now 100% compliant. When Cheryl got home and saw the new garden, her reaction was priceless. She stood in her driveway for nearly an hour, pacing back and forth, ruler and phone in hand, desperately searching for something she could still flag. But there was nothing left for her to nitpick. We'd closed every loophole. Still, she didn't back off. Instead, she took her smear campaign to the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming she'd seen rats near Mom's bird feeder. When a few kind neighbors spoke up in Mom's defense, those comments mysteriously vanished. Not long after, anonymous violation notices started showing up in their mailboxes, too. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a video call with some potential investors when Mom rang me in tears again. This time, Cheryl had pushed the HOA board to require every house in the neighborhood to be repainted in one of their approved colors within 30 days. And wouldn't you know it, the only approved contractor was her brother-in-law's company, and his rates were triple the going price. Mom was already on a tight fixed income. Another expense like that would crush her. That night, while I was comforting her and promising she wouldn't have to face this alone, I glanced out the kitchen window and spotted something strange. Cheryl was holding another meeting in her backyard. But this time it wasn't the usual crowd. There were several people I didn't recognize, and they were passing around documents and pointing at different houses on what looked like a detailed property map. Something wasn't right. This wasn't about gnomes and garden flags anymore. Something bigger was brewing. I canceled my trip to Japan. Whatever was going on, it was clear my mom and our entire neighborhood needed me here. Cheryl had made the mistake of thinking I was just some overworked son who'd keep cutting checks to avoid a fight. She had no clue that I'd been building a case against her from the beginning, or that I had the tools, time, and money to push back in ways she couldn't even dream of. As I watched her little backyard gathering through the window, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old friend who worked down at the county records office. What he'd uncovered about Cheryl's past dealings with other HOAs made my jaw drop. The moment I stepped through Mom's front door later that evening, my heart broke. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, clutching another bright red notice in her trembling hands. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. And her beloved garden gnomes? They were lined up on the dining room table, like tiny soldiers getting ready to be shipped off into exile. I really tried to keep up, Mom whispered, her voice shaky and full of defeat. But my hands, they just don't work like they used to. She held them up for me to see, fingers swollen and twisted from arthritis, making even the simplest tasks feel impossible. The latest notice, stamped "Final Warning" in angry red letters, threatened to slap a lien on her home. Why? Because her shrubs were supposedly 2 inches taller than what Cheryl had arbitrarily decided was acceptable for the neighborhood. I sat with Mom at the kitchen table as we sifted through a mountain of HOA violation letters, each one pettier than the last. The border bricks around her flower bed weren't the approved shade of red. Her wind chimes, the ones she used to gauge the breeze for planting, were labeled a noise disturbance. Even the bird feeder, which brought her joy every morning, had been flagged for attracting undesirable wildlife. While I was doing my best to calm her down, my phone lit up with messages from neighbors. Turns out Cheryl had been making her rounds, literally going door to door with a full-blown PowerPoint presentation. She was showing off photoshopped images of Mom's garden, making it look overgrown and abandoned. She claimed the neglected property was responsible for a 15% drop in everyone's home value. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Cheryl had ramped up her attacks the moment I left for Japan to close the biggest business deal of my life. It was too well timed to be a coincidence. A quick scroll through social media confirmed my suspicion. Cheryl had been following my business moves closely, commenting on news articles, even posting little backhanded remarks under updates about my company's growth, all while harassing my mom behind my back. The next morning, I made some calls. The sale of my company had just finalized a clean $89 million, but I kept that detail to myself. Instead, I brought in a professional landscaping team to document every single inch of Mom's yard. They measured everything, took high-resolution photos and videos, and created a full report proving that everything on the property was still within the original HOA guidelines, the real guidelines. The ones Cheryl had secretly changed without notifying homeowners or getting the proper approvals. But Cheryl didn't waste time. That same afternoon, she scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for the following week, claiming immediate action was needed to protect, quote, community standards. She even went as far as hiring private security to block my mom from attending, saying her presence would be disruptive. What Cheryl didn't know was that I'd already hired 3 powerhouse law firms that specialize in HOA abuse cases. I'd pulled property records for every house in the neighborhood. I'd also filed a request for the HOA's financial records going back 5 years. Most importantly, she had no idea that by harassing my mother, she'd picked a fight with someone who had the money, time, and firepower to dig into everything. And I meant everything she'd ever done in her role as HOA president. Later that evening, I stood at the kitchen window and watched as Cheryl strutted down the sidewalk with her usual smug grin. She had her measuring tape in one hand and her phone in the other, snapping photos of Mom's roses like she was documenting a crime scene. She was so wrapped up in playing neighborhood cop, she didn't even notice the unmarked car across the street, the one with the private investigator I'd hired, who was filming her every move. The HOA meeting was in 7 days. Cheryl probably thought this was her grand finale, the moment she finally forced Mom out of her home. But I had a gut feeling there was more to this than just roses and wind chimes. Her obsession with this particular property didn't add up, and I was determined to figure out why. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom crying in her armchair, so I stayed up and dug into every HOA document we had. The more I read, the more things didn't sit right. There was a pattern. Cheryl was going after certain homeowners while completely ignoring violations on others. I couldn't prove it yet, but it smelled like favoritism. Or worse, some kind of scheme. The next morning, I called up Erica, an old college friend who's now one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. I brought her up to speed and asked her to help me dig deeper. We started by requesting the HOA's financial records. Right away, Cheryl pushed back, claiming the documents were private. But Erica knew the law. Those records were legally required to be accessible to every homeowner. So we pushed harder. What was Cheryl hiding? I doubled down and hired the most reputable private investigation firm in the area. Within days, they uncovered something big. Turns out, Cheryl had a cozy little arrangement going with her brother-in-law's construction business. The same one listed as the approved contractor for everything from landscaping to repainting. The company? Monroe's Perfect Homes. Everything was starting to make sense. Every time Cheryl slapped someone with a violation, she forced them to use her brother-in-law's company for the repairs, charging 3 times the going rate. The deeper we dug, the worse the whole thing got. I found out that the Andersons, a sweet elderly couple who'd lived here for over 40 years, had lost their entire retirement savings. All because Cheryl made them replace their whole roof over one loose shingle. Then, there were the Brennans, who had to take out a loan to redo their perfectly good driveway. Why? Because the shade of gray didn't match Cheryl's aesthetic vision. Meanwhile, her best friend Tina had a rusty old junker rotting in her front yard for months. Not a single violation. Total silence from the self-appointed enforcer. But the real shock came when my investigators followed the money. Turns out Cheryl had been dipping into the HOA funds for personal luxuries, including multiple trips to Hawaii. She'd been cutting checks to herself from the community account, claiming they were for emergency repairs that, surprise, surprise, never actually happened. Over the course of 3 years, she'd stolen more than $50,000 from our neighbors. I spent weeks putting together a rock-solid case. We collected everything: security footage, bank records, screenshots, and even sworn statements from contractors who admitted Cheryl had threatened them into silence. And while I was gathering all this, Cheryl just kept showing up at my mom's house, issuing bogus fines and criticizing her roses, blissfully unaware that the walls were closing in. Then came the break we needed. One of Cheryl's former assistants reached out to me. She had saved emails, damning ones. In them, Cheryl openly bragged about how she was cleaning up the neighborhood by forcing out older residents who couldn't afford her ever-changing fines. She was targeting people she believed were too weak or too poor to fight back. That was the final straw. I called for an emergency meeting with the HOA board, this time without Cheryl. When I laid out the evidence, the reactions around the table said it all. Shock, disgust, guilt. A few of them had suspected something was off for a while, but they'd been too intimidated to say anything. As we talked, more stories poured out. Turns out, Cheryl had been using HOA meetings to gather intel, watching who seemed stressed, who was living alone, who might not have the energy to push back. Then she'd move in, targeting them one by one. The last puzzle piece fell into place when we uncovered proof that Cheryl had changed official HOA rules without any legal vote. She'd even forged signatures to push her personal agenda. Whenever she wanted something, she just made up a new rule to get her way. I knew we had her, but I didn't just want to stop her. I wanted to make sure she never did this to anyone else again. So I reached out to a few local news stations, told them I was ready to go public if the board tried to bury the truth. And I set up a meeting with the district attorney's office because at this point, it wasn't just bullying, it was criminal activity. Just when I thought we'd seen it all, my investigators dug up one more connection. Cheryl wasn't just corrupt here. She'd been offering consulting services to HOAs in nearby towns. She was teaching other communities how to deal with difficult residents. God knows how many other neighborhoods she'd poisoned with her tactics. The next HOA meeting was only 2 days away. Cheryl had no clue that everything she'd built was about to come crashing down. That night, while I was organizing files and prepping my team, Mom called again. "She's at the door," she said, her voice tired but steady. "She's waiving another violation notice. Says she's putting a lien on the house." I just smiled. That was going to be the last time Cheryl Monroe ever harassed my mother. What she didn't know was that the upcoming meeting wasn't going to be about Mom's roses. It was going to be about her. And I'd invited a few special guests, agents from the FBI's Real Estate Fraud Division. The morning of the meeting felt different, focused, quiet. My legal team rolled up with 3 big boxes of evidence, each one packed to the brim. Financial statements, altered documents, surveillance photos, everything. As I walked into the community center, I saw Cheryl sitting in her usual seat, smug as ever, sipping her coffee like she owned the place. She had no idea what was coming. I started slow, pulled out property maps, and showed everyone that Cheryl's precious rose trellis, the one she loved to show off, was actually 6 inches over her property line. The same kind of violation she'd been fining others for. The room went still. Then I moved on to the HOA's financials. 5 years of shady bookkeeping, waived fees for her friends, doubled penalties for the people she didn't like, a pattern of targeted abuse backed by cold, hard numbers. Whispers started rippling through the room. But then came the bombshell. The security footage. The video played on the screen, grainy but clear. Cheryl, taking a wad of cash from Doug, the only contractor she ever approved for HOA violations. The same guy who charged triple the normal rate and then split the extra profits with her. You could feel the energy shift in the room. Someone in the back gasped. Cheryl jumped up, her face going red. "This is ridiculous," she barked. "I've only ever tried to protect our property values." But I wasn't finished. I held up letters from elderly residents who'd been forced to take out loans just to pay off her outrageous fines. I showed photos and medical records from Mrs. Johnson, who ended up in the ER after falling off a ladder, trying to clean her gutters before Cheryl made good on her threat to put a lien on her house. That broke the dam. Neighbors started sharing their own stories, years of frustration boiling to the surface. The Christmas lights they were ordered to take down. The basketball hoops yanked from their kids' driveways. Garden beds destroyed for being an inch too wide. Cheryl's grip on the neighborhood had lasted too long, and everyone finally had a chance to speak. Then I laid out my plan. Over the past few months, I'd quietly purchased 4 properties in the neighborhood, enough to give me voting power to call for a special election. The law firm I hired had already drafted a new set of bylaws designed to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. We'd have a resident review board for all violation claims and built-in protections for seniors and folks with disabilities. That's when Cheryl stood up, hands shaking. "You can't do this. I've been president for 6 years. I know the rules." I looked her straight in the eye. "That's the problem," I said calmly. "You knew the rules too well, and you used them to hurt people. But not anymore." The vote wasn't even close. It was unanimous. Cheryl was officially removed as HOA president. But it didn't end there. The district attorney had taken a close look at the evidence, the embezzlement, the kickbacks, the forged documents, and found more than enough to move forward. 3 weeks later, Cheryl was formally charged. And the money we recovered from her scheme? We used it to start a neighborhood assistance program, helping elderly homeowners with things like yard maintenance, home repairs, and basic upkeep. Real community support, not punishment. Mom's garden is blooming again, brighter than ever. And her collection of garden gnomes? Let's just say they've multiplied. Like they knew they were safe now. These days, the new HOA board meets monthly. We swap cookies, share stories, and actually look for ways to help each other. Imagine that. Just last week, I saw Cheryl loading up a moving truck. And wouldn't you know it, that pristine white picket fence she forced 5 other families to tear down? Yeah, she had to remove hers too, under the new bylaws she never saw coming. As she drove away, Mom and I sat together on the porch swing, sipping lemonade and listening to her wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. "You know," she said, smiling at her little army of garden gnomes, "sometimes the best revenge is just making things right." The next morning, we got a call from a reporter. Word had spread. Turns out our story had sparked something bigger. Communities across the country were waking up, speaking out, and taking a stand against abusive HOAs. And somehow, Mom's garden gnomes had become a symbol, a quiet rebellion against neighborhood bullies. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with one person saying enough. Or in our case, with one retired school teacher and her determined little army of gardeners.